Hey truckers, it's Nina from EMPWR Trucking, and in today's video, we're going to talk about the hidden side of the current broker transparency bloodbath and 5 things you should know to avoid getting screwed. Welcome to our Trucking Academy. Now, this broker transparency battle isn't new, despite the fact that it made headlines last November when the case of TQL exposed the broker of making a 44% margin on a load. Now, since then, and as a result, we've had 2 industry groups, OIDA and the SPTC, who are now pushing the FMCSA to revisit Regulation 371, which requires that brokers A, maintain documents of their transactions as records, and B, allows any party to the broker transaction the right to review these documents. Now, what this essentially means is that you as a carrier have the right to request these documents from the broker that show what the broker had made from the shipper for a load that you hauled. Now, prior to this TQL hype, many carriers actually weren't aware that they had these rights, nor do they know that some broker carrier contracts contain very specific clauses in the fine print that waive their rights. And unfortunately, we have some brokers in this industry who are engaged in such corruptive practices. Now, given this push in the industry to revisit Regulation 371, there's been a lot of controversy, especially amongst the carrier community. There are some carriers that are in favor of this rule, claiming that it'll help them improve operational decision making. And then there's another subset of carriers who argue that these broker transparency demands are essentially worthless and that it would be more worthwhile if all the carriers sort of got together and just stopped accepting cheap freight like they're doing nowadays, as that would sort of force brokers to up their rates. Now, keeping this sort of controversial backdrop in mind, you should know that there has now been a surge of carriers in the industry who have started to exercise their rights under Regulation 371, especially after the TQL hype. And this has caused a lot of brokers to now get very creative with their workarounds, sometimes in ways that can be detrimental to you as a carrier. So before you go out and about and decide to exercise your rights, let's discuss 5 things that you should keep in mind to better navigate this landscape. Number 1, Regulation 371 is a tricky gray area from a legal perspective. According to Ken Adamo, who is the chief of analytics at DAT, he stated, and I quote, that it's just regulation and not legislation, which means that we currently have no details on how it would be enforced. Number 2, Regulation 371 does not specify how the broker should disclose these documents to you. And this is where we found brokers get very creative with their workarounds. They can ask you for absurd things like to fly into their head office to view the documents in person. So just be aware that they'll try to do anything to make things more complicated for you. Number 3, Regulation 371 is a two-way street. So let's say if after viewing the broker's documents, you see their margins and you decide to go out to the shipper and see if you can get a better rate. In this case, the broker can actually sue you for something called back solicitation. So you should keep that in mind. Number 4, the FMCSA doesn't require that carriers are provided these documents upfront, rather 48 hours after the contractual service has been completed. Now, if you think about it, what good does that really do for you? In fact, it's more beneficial if you knew upfront the brokers who are engaged in these corruptive practices of adding these, specific clauses in their broker contracts that waive carriers' rights. So apart from TQL, we've also found that Echo, Global Trans, Coyote, and BMAC are also engaged in such practices. And lastly, number 5, according to a recent article published in FreightWaves, OIDA claims that there is this sort of unspoken rule in the industry where carriers that try and exercise their rights under Regulation 371 are often blacklisted by brokers. Now, you should ask yourself, especially in a market like this, can you afford the risk of getting put on a DNU list? Remember that sometimes a good rate per mile can give you a bad daily rate and vice versa. And especially in a market like this, where equipment utilization is key, it may actually be more profitable for you if you more frequently accept cheaper freight. Now, at the end of the day, if you do decide to exercise your rights under Regulation 371, I highly suggest you reach out to OIDA or the SPTC to help you with the process. OIDA can provide you with sample legal draft language for the request to brokers to put these records in writing, and the SPTC can connect you with an FMCSA investigator if you suspect that your rights have been violated by a broker. Stay empowered, truckers, and comment below on what you think so we can help the trucker community.